Terraria's boss fights, you gotta love them and hate them. Today we're gonna be ranking every main boss fight in Terraria from worst to best. Now keep in mind, this is not just my personal opinion because I said it's objective, which means it is. Anyway, the first boss to rank is King Slime. What's interesting about this boss fight is that it is barely even a boss fight at all. He's just a normal slime who can teleport sometimes. Half the boss fight is just dealing with the insufferable slime rain event that he spawns from. That's really where all of the challenge comes from. He's pretty cool looking though. D tier. The Eye of Cthulhu. Now this is a straight up classic. Not only does he have a simple and fun attack pattern, but he also drops the Shield of Cthulhu, which is probably the most fun item in the entire game. He's a little too simple to put at the top of the list. He's still an A tier though. The Eater of Worlds. Once again, how could you possibly criticize this guy? Well, actually, there are probably a lot of reasons to criticize this guy. Like the Eye of Cthulhu, this boss fight is very simple and easy to deal with, although it is a lot more annoying as well. Whenever you fight him in multiplayer, you kinda just have to accept that he's gonna turn into a million fast and annoying parts by the end. He's also possibly the most annoying boss fight ever in expert mode. Him shooting out all of these little projectiles is kinda cool, but it's also a total nightmare to deal with. C tier. The Brain of Cthulhu, on the other hand, now this is a boss fight that you actually can't really criticize. This guy was put into Terraria so long after the Eater of Worlds, and it kinda shows. This boss fight is simply more interesting. That move where he makes a bunch of illusions to distract the player is actually very cool, and the rest of his attacks, while not as interesting, are still pretty fun. His design also fits the Crimson perfectly. I usually prefer the Corruption, although I can't deny that this boss fight is so much better than the Eater of Worlds. A tier. Next up is my man Skeletron. Once again, this is a very easy boss fight, but I feel like he puts up a much bigger challenge than the other pre-hard mode bosses. You can't just tank this guy like you would with the previous boss fights. Dodging Skeletron's attacks is actually pretty fun. My only complaint when it comes to this guy is that the Bone Gloves are possibly the lamest boss drop in the entire game, which makes beating this boss feel slightly less rewarding in expert mode, but nonetheless, he is a fantastic boss fight. S tier. Queen Bee. This boss is like a hornet, but bigger, I guess. F tier. Okay, but for real though, this boss fight is actually pretty fun. Its design is pretty neat, and the beehive is a fun arena. There's still not that much to say about it. We all know that the bee has got to go into the B tier. You get it? Wall of Flesh is the final pre-hard mode boss fight on this list, and he's also the best. Preparing for this battle is unbelievably tedious. Getting all the materials, building a giant bridge, grinding for the guide dolls, this is some of the least fun I have ever had in Terraria. Once you actually fight the boss fight though, it all feels worth it. The challenge of killing this boss before he catches up to you or kills you with as many attacks is so brilliant and well thought out. This kind of gameplay is never really seen before or after the Wall of Flesh in Terraria, which makes it that much more special. The reward of entering hard mode after beating him is also probably the most satisfactory moment in the entire game, even beyond beating the Moonlord at the end. And then you've got the soundtrack, man, come on! S tier. Queen Slime was a boss that got added back in 1.4, and after fighting it for the first time I thought, okay. That's all I thought. Okay, the boss fight is certainly more interesting than the King Slime, but that's the lowest bar ever. I feel like the Queen Slime always just slips past my mind. I always forget that it's in the game until I'm reminded, which is probably because the Empress of Light got added in the same update, and that boss fight is way more engaging. All I remember about Queen Slime is that she is kind of annoying, but also, you know, pretty cool design. B tier. Now we're getting to the three mechanical bosses, starting with the twins. This is like if the Eye of Cthulhu was actually complicated and there were two of them. It also uses the same amazing boss theme from the Wall of Flesh. In this boss fight, you've really got to choose which eye to target first. If you want to be reasonable, you will target the green eye, and if you want to put yourself through hell, you'll target the other eye. Dodging the distinct attacks from both of these enemies is incredibly fun. The twins are a perfect example of a 2-on-1 boss fight in a video game, done right. Easy S tier. The Destroyer. This guy is just the Eater of Worlds, but bigger. He also shoots lasers, I guess. B tier. Skeletron Prime. This guy is also just basically Skeletron, but bigger. And he has a chainsaw, I guess? This is basically the easiest boss fight in the entire game for where you're at. He's way too slow to actually put up a challenge, and he's just an annoying tank that takes way too long to defeat. C tier. Moving on from the mechs, it's time to actually talk about a unique boss fight Plantera. Just like with the Wall of Flesh, it is a big chore to set up the arena for this guy, but when you do, the boss fight is very fun. Plantera is certainly not the best boss fight in the game or anything. She does feel great to fight at the end of the day though, which probably comes from all of the little weapons you can unlock after defeating the mechanical bosses. This is a perfect boss fight to test your new weapons on. I do really like how aggressive this fight becomes after you deal a lot of damage. Plantera really starts going berserk near the end, which raises the stakes by a lot. The stakes are also very high because if you die to this boss fight, you'll have to go through the entire bulb finding process again, which is not very fun. Pretty cool boss fight, A tier. One of the hardest boss fights is the next one that's coming up, Duke Fishron. I remember back in the day, this guy was perceived as the final boss by kids like me playing on their iPads, and it's crazy that even today he is still one of the most challenging boss fights. This battle is just straight up fun, there's no other way to describe it. That funky music playing in the background, that crazy third stage where he turns into an invisible ninja thing, just having a crazy boss fight like this on the beach in the first place is super interesting. S tier. The next boss fight to rank is the Empress of Light. S tier. The end. The Lunatic Cultists. This is one of those classic wizard enemies in a video game that is just beyond frustrating to deal with. Not a single one of this guy's attacks are fun to dodge. They look very cool, and in terms of design, I would say this is probably one of the coolest boss fights, but the gameplay itself is just not very good. That move where he summons a serpent after you attack one of his clones is just disgusting. Why does it do so much damage? The worst part is that this move is basically inevitable if you're playing with multiple people as well, and for that nonsense alone, D tier. The final boss in the entire game is up next, the Moon Lord. The best thing about this boss fight is that it truly feels like the end of the game. The music, the attacks, even the design of the Moon Lord itself, everything is just so dramatic, you can really tell this is it. Beyond that though, the gameplay is actually pretty fun. Having distinct health bars for every body part is a very weird design choice that somehow paid off in the end. There really isn't a single boss fight in Terraria, or most games in general, that plays out the same way as the Moonlord boss fight. There isn't that much to say because his attacks are honestly pretty simple. Let's just say that this guy makes for a pretty cool finale. A tier. This is a pretty flawless list if I do say so myself. It's very cool that I did not forget a single boss in the game as well, because it would be a real shame if I forgot one of the boss fights.